Well, first of all, thank you to everyone for joining. I can see there's 180 people on this call, so I guess we're all eager to know about and learn as much about the post-COVID-19 workplace as we can. You're not just hearing from me today. In fact, I'm just a facilitator today. I'm going to be drawing on the expertise of three world-renowned leaders in the field of workplace and design and data, and using data to inform design. So I'm going to, first of all, I'll just tell you about the format of today. Basically, we've got an hour and I'm going to split it into three roughly 20-minute sections. And the first 20 minutes will give our three experts the opportunity to have their views, let us know their views in a short 5-minute statement. And some of them have slides, well, they all have slides actually, and that's going to be really good in itself. So not only do we have that, then I'm going to follow that up with 20, maybe 25 minutes of questions to each of our panelists. And then right at the end, we'll allow some time for questions from our 197 participants and growing. This is amazing. So we'll allow some questions from our participants. Some of you have already sent through some really good questions to test the skills and knowledge of our panel. So let me introduce the panel to you. First of all the way from Atlanta, we have Arjun Kaicker. Great to see you, Arjun. Arjun, we've known each other for at least 10 years, and I know you've been in the workplace industry, consulting industry for at least 20 years. And I first knew you when you were at Foster's, and of course you've since now joined Zaha Hadid. And you've got the wonderful title of Head of User Parametrics, which I think is probably one of the best sounding titles that I've come across in a long time. So we'll be hearing from Arjun very shortly. And then following Arjun, we've got Kerstin Sailer. Hi, Kerstin. Good to see you as ever. And again, someone else I've known for some time. And many of you will know Kerstin, I think, through her involvement with space syntax and her work through the Bartlett School of Architecture at UCL. But of course, Kerstin also has her own consulting business with her colleague Roz called Brainy Birds. And in Brainy Birds, they, I quoted it here, they use data to see how a workplace ticks. So I think we're going to hear how some of that data can help us in the future. And then finally, but no means last, we have Tim Oldman of the world famous Leesman Index, the biggest way of measuring and benchmarking the effectiveness of your workplace. Now, I think when I last looked, Tim, there was 750,000 responses. I think it may have probably gone up by now. And not only are you now looking at workplace, but you're also looking at home working as well. So lots more to learn there. So those are our three panelists. We're talking about what's going to happen in the future. I don't know when the future is. I was so disappointed. I try and keep the politics out of this, but I was so disappointed with the statement that our government, UK government made on Sunday. And I'm looking for more enlightenment, more enlightened views about what we can all do at a practical sense in the short and long term to help us get through this horrible crisis. But on that note, could I ask Arjun to put your mic on, Arjun, share your screen and tell us about your views on the current situation.
Okay, hi everyone. It's great to be here today and be part of this discussion. I'll just share my screen now. It's Nigel asked a question a few days ago to us of what will be the new normal for the workplace in 2021. And when I started thinking about this, I remembered that a couple of months back, maybe 3 months back, just before the pandemic really started to take hold in Europe and America, that I had put together a presentation about what I thought the emerging trends are in the workplace and what we're seeing really going forward and the positive trends in the workplace. And this is what I thought. So I thought we're getting much more about well-being and health in the workplace, which is really great. Our organizations we're really focusing much more upon that, upon a lot more variety and flexibility in the workplace, about a lot more connection and collaboration between staff in the workplace and really designing for that. And the really exciting introduction of internet-enabled devices throughout the workplace, the Internet of Things, and also predictive technology and AI in a way helping us to create self-learning buildings. And then with this crisis, I was looking at, well, what's really changed from that? Has this completely been turned on its head? And what I really felt was that actually health and well-being has become much more important, much more front and center. And I think there are real opportunities to create much healthier workplaces, not just to be COVID secure, but also to help us with general wellness and health, building our immune systems, and helping to stop the seasonal flu, common colds, etc., being spread in the workplace. And variety and flexibility. Now, of course, it's about location variety and flexibility as well. And connection and collaboration, we're going to have to think much more about that going forward. It can't just be a scattergun effect of trying to get everyone to collaborate with everyone else. I think we have to be really focused on how we get the best collaboration between the right people. And then, as we're seeing already with contact tracing technology, that I think IoT and AI is really going to be fast-tracked in the workplace. And this, again, can be a very positive step. And of course, we're going to talk more today about distance and separation and the effect of that. And of course, lower densities in the workplace, less people fitting into the space, really actually probably needing to work from home, and what these implications are going to be. And then how we move around the workplaces as well. And I like this slide because it was, obviously this is pre-COVID, we didn't build this in 3 weeks, but the idea of having more staircases, maybe more escalators through buildings, obviously not in the next few weeks, but maybe going forward in the next few years. Interestingly here, this escalator is very narrow, so it only allows one person to go at a time. So you have to be single file, and of course it only goes in one direction. So I think this shows how we can create design techniques which are going to help people to naturally socially distance. And then contactless journeys. So really being able to touch less doorknobs, less lift buttons, and using technology to help us with that. And what we have been doing in the last few years is looking at re-engineering some of our existing analytics. Here's analytics that we put together to look at the distance between everyone on the floor plate to see who is most connected. And we're starting to look at how we can adapt that to also see how we can make sure we can optimize the safe distance between people as well. And looking at how different furniture arrangements, even at the same densities, can have a different impact upon that ability to effectively socially distance. And then circulation routes, of course. If we look at the one on the left, we can see that this is where there's potentially a real issue for the people sitting at those desks. As in here, there is more of a flow of people around. We're distributing the circulation more. So there's less intensity of circulation. And we're really looking at just different ways of analyzing the space to see how we can help to improve it to be COVID secure, as the expression now seems to be. And then finally, what we're looking at as well is, or we have been looking at, is how we can do more automated space planning. And we were already looking at having, as we can see here, zones. So these are not 2 meter, but they could be. And we're looking to readjust this to create 2 meter zones so that we can space plan, we can effectively space plan spaces maybe much quicker than we could have manually, but also with many more options. And so people can really pick not just what fits, what works, but what's really actually best for them. Well, that's it. That's 5 minutes, 20 seconds. Sorry for overrunning.
That's great. Thank you very much, Arjun. And I mean, what I thought was fascinating about that presentation is not only just the wonderful tools that you guys have developed over the years and the technology, but how you've had to now adapt them to, I think, rather than before about making people kind of clash and come together. Now it's about how do we keep the degrees of separation. And and also, I guess, how we focus less on efficiencies and more on distances, if that makes sense. Is that a fair comment?
No, absolutely. And one of the things that we were looking at before, and I don't know if people have heard of the Allen curve. This was in the late 1970s, where the MIT professor, Thomas Allen, realized that there's this exponential drop in collaboration, in face-to-face collaboration after 8 meters. So we were looking before COVID at how can we improve that zone of 8 meters. Now what we're doing is looking at how can we improve the zone between 2 and 8 meters. Because really, after that 8 meters, people aren't collaborating that much. So really concentrating the collaboration within that zone so people aren't maybe moving around the office so much as they did before, but really they're near the people they need to be near with. And that might change because, of course, we don't just talk to the people in our own team, we talk cross-functionally. And so what we're looking at as well is mechanisms where we can really improve who sits with who to really try to keep the amount of collaboration that we have grown to know and love in the workplace, but make it safer.
Yeah, I guess in neighbourhoods, kind of small.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Really bringing back neighbourhoods into workplace.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll come back with more questions. Welcome to the now 270 people that have joined us. An amazing turnout, which is great for us and our speakers. We've just heard from Arjun at Zaha Hadid about their approach going forward. And now I'm going to turn to Kerstin to tell us her views on the post-COVID-19 workplace.
So the question that we're asking today is what will be the new normal for the workplace in 2021? And the view that I will bring to this is informed by theory and informed by a scientific approach that I'm following both in my academic life, but also as a co-founder of Brainy Birds. Generally, if we look at buildings, what buildings do from a social point of view, there are two very different mechanisms. So you could think of buildings as a mechanism of either bringing people together or keeping people apart. Pre-COVID, we would have thought of those two mechanisms mostly in terms of building types. So the office as a place where we want to bring people together, and the image on the right is the Royal Courts of Justice in London, where we would think about here we need to really keep people apart, because people are not meant to accidentally bump into each other and the witness and the defendant and the judge kind of kindly exchanging some viewpoints. But now I think COVID has forced us, as Arjun has already alluded to rethink that what we previously thought of as encounters as being the lifeblood of offices, we now need to rethink much more of how can we mediate between encounters and avoidance. In the last week, we've at Brainy Birds, we've been asked to help one of our clients to do a social distancing or physical distancing floor plan, because I think that's the other thing a lot of people call the distancing, social distancing, and that's by no means what we should be talking about. We need to have physical distancing, but still maintain some kind of social community. So what you can see here in red is the circulation, how this organization could be using their existing office. Now, not everyone has the pleasure of working in a Zaha Hadid designed office. I wish we all could, but we don't. So there will be a lot of people in, kind of normal offices, not quite so well designed maybe, to think about how does that apply to us? So we basically took the layout as it was and just highlighted which seats could be safely used. And we ended up with a maximum capacity of 38 for an organization of 115 staff. But maybe what's more important is to look at this and to think, wow, this really is not the office how we used to know it. It will be a very different experience. And also thinking about, for example, I think you can see my mouse, hopefully. If you're working in one of those meeting rooms or here in this meeting room on your own, it will be a very lonely experience. So if people get excited about this, oh, we can come back to the office, it will be a very different experience. But maybe more so, the kind of two other points I would like to make in this short statement is, first of all, that different layouts have different affordances. So if you think of this very simple diagram of a 3x3 room, you could have 4 very different layouts just by virtue of the numbers of openings you have. In image A on the left, you have a very linear layout. So you come in here from the outside world, and there's just one possible path of how you could explore up until the very end, where you have a choice of 2 spaces. Now, if you have an office that is very linear, there's different things that you need to be thinking about than if you have a different kind of office. So, for example, in this linear layout, you can't use one-way circulation because people will have to be going back and forth through this one kind of space of access. If, for example, you have more of a tree-shaped layout, so you can come in here, there's a central spine, and then you kind of branch off into those spaces to the left and right. Again, this space here, the central trunk of the tree, you can't do one-way circulation because otherwise you'd be cutting off certain spaces. But then those kind of dead ends, they're relatively safe neighborhoods. If you have loops, and that's number C here, and you find that your layout allows you to go in these kinds of loops, so there's a loop here, and there's another loop in the system here, you could think about one-way systems. So you could take the layout and, for example, say, we always go clockwise, so you enter here and you go through here, and that would allow you to manage the flow of people much more naturally. If you have a grid layout, and maybe what Arjun showed with some of these organic layouts, they much more resemble those kind of grids where from everywhere you can kind of go everywhere else. They distribute movement, which is good, but they also create a lot of encounters because people can move very freely to and from. So all of those 4 archetypes you will find in different proportions in real existing offices. And it's worth thinking through, how could I make the best of my particular layout, and then react and think about what organizations will need to be doing with their existing layouts. Now, final point, we really want to still continue to think of offices as places for meaningful encounter. The pandemic has given us all this very big experiment of, with almost no notice, everyone working from home, all offices being closed. And we've all adapted, right? We've all made it work somehow. But we think what we're going to realize, and what a lot of people have already realized, is that not all tasks are created equal. Certain tasks are relatively easy to do in this remote working, and other tasks are very, very difficult. So if we think about the types of tasks that we do in offices, complex tasks, so those that need trust, that concern tricky topics, where tacit knowledge is included, or where you need dynamic encounters, those are really best placed in a face-to-face situation. Whereas simple tasks, things that are transactional, things that are low risk, recurring topics, or unstable relationships, those things are much easier to do remotely because we already have a relationship that we can build on. And again, that just shows us how there's been a lot of talk in the media about we don't need offices anymore, and it's the death of the office, it's the death of open plan, it's the death of pretty much everything. And I just want to stop here and pause and just find the point of saying offices used to be and still will be a place for meaningful encounter, because we are social animals and we need the exchange, and we need to find ways to get into face-to-face conversations, because they allow us to work in different ways. And of course, distancing is probably going to be here to stay for at least a year. So we need to find ways to get through that period. But then I think we need to rethink, how do we want to create a future? And that might not necessarily be going back to the offices as we used to have them. think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerstin. Quite a lot of ideas and a lot to take in there. Thank you. And I get that final point I think you made. In my mind, I was immediately going through the idea that we've talked about activity-based working for some time, but now it really is talking about the activities outside and inside the space as well. Your point about your other point about the death of the open plan office, we'll come back to that.
Please.
Later, because I think that's a big question. But let's listen. Let's hear what Tim has to say on the subject. First of all, Tim.
Great. So, what I'd like to suggest for this warm up is we take a slightly different approach, actually, in terms of trying to answer a question. Because I think the slight problem in the question, in terms of what will the new normal look like in 2021, I don't think any of us sitting here have the faintest idea. And I know we're going to come and you're going to probe us later on our thoughts on what our dear Prime Minister said, and then what the Chancellor of the Exchequer said just the following day. And let's face it, it's moving so fast, and the situation is unfolding in a dynamic way on a daily basis that I even would wonder and worry about too much speculation about what any sort of any new normal might look like. If you put me on the spot and ask for my gut instinct, I don't think, which is why I put that down in the bottom left-hand corner, it's a case of better workplace being office versus home. I think it is almost certainly going to be a blended mix, and the extent to which it's blended, we can only guess. My guess would be that we will return to a very near normal if we were going to class what we've just left behind as some sort of normal. So I was going to suggest lots of people sat at home, lots of people on furlough. Anybody on furlough in your teams, I'd remind you that they can partake in learning and development. They're not allowed to work for you, but they are allowed to embark on any learning and development programs that you suggest to them. And this is one that I'd suggest. It's a great book, Matthew Syed, Black Box Thinking. If you've not read it, read it. It's awesome. A little bit of a spoiler alert, though. In the first chapter is quite a sad story about a lady called Elaine Bromley, and then what Matthew goes on to talk about around the sort of the subject of human factors is a topic called target fixation. And this is why I'd suggest reading this book, because I think this is what we're all suffering from a little bit at the moment. Target fixation is the idea that actually you become so obsessed by the obstacle, you fail to look around into the clear space either side of it. This is something that's become much more scientifically researched in the last sort of 10 years, with more and more motorcyclists wearing these little head cams, right? When they go out with their GoPros on, and actually post-accident, an awful lot of crash investigators finding, to their surprise, that fatal accidents shouldn't have been fatal. And actually that there was plenty of space for a motorcyclist to avoid the obstacle, but they become fixated by the obstacle and an impact happens. For any skiers, I know Nigel's a mountain biker. He has a slightly different take on this, but it's pretty much the same. If you're an off-piste skier, the first lesson you're taught when a teacher takes you off-piste is don't look at the trees, look at the space between the trees. And that's really what I want to suggest we do a little bit more of at the moment, is stop looking at the obstacle immediately in front of us and start casting our eyes to some of the wider landscape in terms of the issues at debate. So not the trees, but the space between the trees. Let's do more of that as a community. I'd also suggest we need to get a little bit more factful. This is one I haven't read yet, but I bought it as a Christmas present for our Dr. Peggy Roth, and she's now insisted that everybody else reads it. It's on a big stack of books that I'll read one day. So my note here really is that we're just 8 weeks in or so to this thing. We can call it an experiment. We can call it a test of home working, but there is very little evidence. We've embarked on it. We launched the product, 4 weeks ago now. We're sitting on nearly 7,000 responses. That will go to somewhere near 100,000 employees' experience of home working in the next 3 to 4 week cycle. Obviously, we're sitting in quite a privileged position because we can compare then the direct experience of employees working from home, and we have the data to know their experience of working from their office, because their roles in the organization haven't changed. And this is quite a unique situation to be able to look at the experience an employee is having at home and the experience that they had in the office for the same organization in the same role. So here, my cautionary note is really about the pace of evolution. We've all known each other for 10 years or more, right, in the industry, and many of the people on the call perhaps for longer. We've stood at conferences not so long ago, Maggie's, with Nigel chairing, talking about exactly this issue, the slow and progressive evolution of what we 8 weeks ago thought was the best version of the office that we could stand on a podium and talk about. Don't screw it all up and throw it away and think that that should be reinvented for tomorrow when we really don't understand what tomorrow might look like. And I know one of the questions already in was, the landscape will change if there's a vaccine or if there isn't, if herd immunity turns out to be a real thing or it doesn't. So let's just observe and be respectful to the pace of workplace evolution. And then my last little sort of visual metaphor is a story that I think sort of like lesson one for most statisticians, and the Abraham Wald survival bias data story. When a Second World War mathematician in the US was asked by the American Army to look at whether additional armament could be added to aircraft. And the what is now the Air Force did an amazing job of capturing all of the bullet hole damage to the returning bombers. And they presented this data with great pride because they'd spent many, many hours accurately recording where all of this bullet hole damage was to the aircraft. And Abraham Wald apparently just took one look at it and said, hang on, wrong data. I need to know where the bullet holes aren't, because that's where they were hit and the aircraft didn't come back. You want to bring aircraft back, don't present me with the data for the aircraft that got back. I want to see the ones that are at the bottom of the ocean or crashed into cliff faces. So survival bias in terms of data is making sure you have the discipline, not just to look at the information you have, but to wonder about the information that you don't. So things like having the discipline, not just to focus on the collaboration of a meeting, a structured formal gathering, but actually to also recognize the immense value of the 5 minutes physical before the meeting and the 10 minutes as people departed from that space at the end. In my mind, it's the 15-minute sandwich either end that has even more value in terms of the 1 hour or the segment that was sandwiched between. So have the discipline and the time really and the patience to look at the whole picture, not just at the micro picture you're presented with. So if that's not enough reading for you, there's a heap of other reading on our website, including some work by Dr. Peggy, which I would really urge you to look at in terms of the value and the facilitation of collaboration. We found that high-performance workplaces needed two things to achieve high performance. They needed high-performance collaborative space, but in order to achieve high satisfaction with the collaboration, they also needed high-performance concentrative space. Because for most people, what comes after a segment of collaboration is a segment of concentrative commitment. And if what we're trying to suggest in the future is that the near normal will be days in the office for collaboration and days at the home concentrating, I'm not buying it, frankly.
Food for thought there, Tim. Thank you very much. That last point I thought was particularly interesting, because I think the immediate idea is it's very simple dichotomy of focus versus collaboration. So nice for you to pick that up. Also, you mentioned the blended office and the blended physical virtual and the challenges of that coming together. But I think the one I want to follow up on the most is this idea of the pace and the non-knee-jerk reaction, which I think is, for me, is typical of some of the solutions we're seeing come through. So I think I'll start the panel questioning with that one. Are we in need of? Are we looking at a full-on design revolution with the new office, or is it a case of recollecting, thinking of what we already have, revisiting? So maybe, Tim, as you picked up on that one, do you want to just start with your views there?
I think it's a hard one to answer, Nigel. I think every workplace entered this crisis with different strengths and different susceptibilities, right? Every organization came into it with a different sense of purpose, a different sense of being, with different people working for it, working in different places. And so I think the impact on a workplace, which is on a business park in a regional city with ample parking and great public transport and awesome end-of-trip facilities for cyclists and runners, has a wholly different set of challenges to my office on Wimpole Street in the middle of London, that my team has, I think, all but one. There's only one team member who can walk to the office, right? It's an office group building, so multi-tenanted. We don't know many of the other tenants. So our issues are massively different to that out-of-town business park. So I don't think it's easy to generalize. I think it's, different FM teams, different real estate teams are going to have different almost even across an organization, each building's issues should be treated as individual and addressed based on the best knowledge that organization has of the situation with the virus at that point in time.
And I guess their knowledge of their people and the building and all the other things. Kerstin, if you've got anything to add to that, maybe some of your data can help a little bit with, you also referred to current offices and some of the challenges with the current office rather than a blank sheet of paper. And let's face it, we're all going to be stuck with going back to our existing offices. So any further comments?
I think quite naturally, I think most organizations don't start with a blank piece of paper, right? So they will be looking at their own offices and they need to think through how they can come back immediately or in the next few months, maybe. I think there's 2 points here. One is it's always interesting to look at the Silicon Valley and the big technology companies, and most of them or all of them have said, don't come back into the office until 2021. So they've made a relatively clear statement. That's interesting because it gives people some stability in times that are changing really, really fast. And I think it's good for people to know what's going to await them. So I think that's an interesting point. Is it a design revolution? I don't think it will be. And I'm an optimist, so I believe there will be a vaccine. I think there will be. If we're failing to get a vaccine in even in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time, the world will look very different on all sorts of levels. And I think what we'll have to keep as humanity is the flexibility to react. And it will be a very different kind of reaction if we don't get a vaccine. For me, I'm an optimist. I believe we will have a vaccine at some point, if not, next year, then maybe in 1.5 years or somewhere down the line. And I think what we have to do now is to think through, and every organization has to do that for themselves, is to look very deeply into their own constitution, their own data sets, their employees, querying their employees, how working from home works for them, and then find ways to think about their task structures, their organizational cultures, and finding ways to get back to meaningful encounters, either remotely or with people in the office, with distancing, but also switching between, simple tasks and complex tasks. I think that's just something for organizations to think about themselves.
So the task thing versus the blended workplace. I mean, Arjun, as someone who's maybe close to the design community, and certainly your presentation picked up on this, so some of the challenges you guys are facing about how you rethink the existing workplaces to make them work. I'll be interested in hearing a little bit more about how we can maintain those social distancing and so on.
Yeah, so first, I think that for some companies, it won't necessarily be a revolution, but I think it will be a revelation to them about the fact that certain members of staff who they did not think would want to work from home or be able to work from home have found that they can. For others, it's obviously exactly the opposite, that they really want to come back to the office or need to come back. But for some, their personality, their tasks, they really will fit with working from home part of the week, predominantly, or all of the week. And I think from a design point of view, we might well see in a lot of organizations a more hybrid workplace, a more physical stroke digital workplace that really has to support both home workers and in-office workers just as efficiently. And I think that will be the case for some organizations. For others, I think it will be it will be a bit of an evolution. I think things won't go back to exactly what they were before. There will be some evolution, and I think that could be good. One of the things I think is good about the distancing, and I think physical distancing is a much better term than social distancing. I think that was a great term, is that offices have got so much more dense, and a lot of them, and Tim will have, I'm sure Tim has this data from the Leesman survey, that the things that people complain about are often to do with the fact they're too densely packed. Distraction, noise, not enough space for them. And the fact that we might now have to have larger desks or space between desks, and maybe mid-height screens between desks so you can still see over them, but it blocks some of the sound. Those things can be very positive changes, I think.
I think you've been reading my blog, Arjun, because I totally agree with you. I think this the density thing is something that's been bugging me for some time. And I was looking at some of the BCO, British Council for Offices, benchmarking data, and it showed that since 2019 to 2018, so their last survey, that the density across the whole workplace, the full NIA, dropped something like 3 square meters a person. So it's like we've taken away 2 desks worth of space per person, or if you like, a desk and the surrounding secondary circulation. And I put in that blog that when I worked at an architect's practice, I had a 2 by 1 meter desk, which meant I was always 2 meters, when I was sat anyway, I was 2 meters away from everyone at that point. Whereas now we seem to be driving smaller and smaller desks, higher and higher densities. We've got the 1400 mil desk has become the norm. I've got clients asking for 1200 1 meter desks. And as you said, the problem with that is impact on noise, impact on cross-infection, impact on air quality, massive, massive impact. So I guess behind my question was this idea that we've been saying don't chase density for some time. Is reducing the density in the short term by, I don't know, removing seats or something, but in the long term by actually rethinking your planning, is that something we should all be doing?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, Kerstin,
yes, I have read yes, I did read your blog, and I thought it was fantastic. And I had thought of all of those things before, actually, apart from the bit about the screen, which I stole directly from your blog about having the that height screen as opposed to the much lower screens we have now, or in the past, the much higher screens. So
we don't want too high, but
so sorry about stealing that bit.
No, it's not a case of stealing. I think it's that we're all coming from different angles, but occasionally we do converge on the same solution.
Yeah, so. and I just want to say that I agree with everything you put in your blog and in Tim's blog as well, which I also read at the same time, and I think it's great that we come from very different. From different perspectives, and yet we really independently come up with a lot of the same thoughts on this, and maybe that's
And sorry, I was going to bring you in, Kerstin, because again, I'm always interested in that data bit, and how can that data just help us really implement the social distancing in the workplace? Is it practical? Let me broaden it, Kerstin. Considering the government's told us to keep our social distancing in the workplace, is it actually possible?
Well, it's going to be very tricky, I think, and people will have to take a lot of tricky choices about how strictly you interpret. The government advice has been very tentative. The advice says in a lot of places, if possible, and then it reverts to, if not possible, do more cleaning. And I think that's one of the difficulties of when it comes to human behavior. Of course, we can change behaviors, right? I mean, we're adaptable as humans. We can live in all sorts of circumstances. The question is, is it fun to live in those circumstances? Or is it productive, or does it help organizations achieve what they need to achieve? But then it's also, the easier an environment is to read, and the more natural you can have movement flows, etc., the less you need rules. I'm slightly dreading, the prospect of having circles drawn on carpets and lots of signage about one-way streets and lots of additional kind of policing. Don't do this, don't do that, don't go too close here, So I think that will be an interesting one. And that has to do with organizational culture, of how can the organization show, for example, if, we are a caring organization, we're not going to maximize now the distancing, and maybe if we can push the 2 meters distance to 1.5, or the 1.5, the World Health Organization just says 1 meter, or it says, if I'm just passing really quickly, maybe that 1 meter doesn't matter either. So, I think it will have to do with how organizations want to show they value staff and how they want to express that value, either by giving people choice. And I agree with Arjun that people might want to work from home because now they've had a taste of it. I would also like to just throw in a caution for all the working parents, and I'm speaking for myself here as a mother of 2 primary school children. I can easily work from home if they go to school, thank you. So I think there's all sorts of contextual things around the ability to work from home that I think we'll have to take into account. Just snippet on the densities. I've done some research just before COVID, and I've submitted a paper which is under peer review at the moment, where I've looked at the impact of the size of an open plan floor plate. So how many people you can actually see around you, around your desk. And I've got survey data, and some of the things we've been finding in that data set is that larger floor plates lead to lower satisfaction ratings from people who say the bigger the floor plan, the more they find it hard even to interact with others. There were some interesting things, and I think we need to develop that nuance when we speak about open plan, is not to say open plan is bad, but the more you expose people to others, the more, there will be downsides to that. And it's not just noise, and it's not just ventilation, but it's also, human performance and satisfaction levels. And that goes in with density. So I think that's...
I think bad open plan is bad open plan. I'm going to come to you, Tim. Bad open plan is bad open plan, and there's good open plan. But I think the 2 variables, the most important variables, are density and the level of partitioning. And I'm not endorsing that we have solid floor-to-wall partitions, but I think we can break up the environment into zones and landscape it a little bit more, so it's not just a big sea of desks. And that big sea of desks with high density is not going to do us any favours for anything. But Tim, you've got loads of data on this. So, are we seeing the death of open plan?
No, not unless developers completely reinvent their financial offer for the commercial cost of office space. We've gone too far down the track in terms of what it costs organisations. You can't achieve the same densities with the types of cellular accommodation we had 20 years ago. So no, you're not going to be able to reinvent it overnight, not unless you bash down the door of the CFO and you suddenly got some hidden millions hidden away in a counter. So no is the answer. I think what it does highlight, Nigel, and Kerstin's paper points to this. As an industry, we all have to put our hands up and accept that we've been wholly irresponsible in not understanding the impact of occupant density, vertical distribution, cellularization, and employee experience, right? So, I got it wrong. 10 years ago when we started the Leaseman Index, we should have been capturing the occupant density, the vertical distribution, the desk sharing ratios, meeting room seats as a ratio of head count. That data should have been captured 10 years ago. We've been doing it for the last 3 years for all our high-performance workplaces, so we know the impact there on employees of their occupant density and their ratios. But a BCO paper, frankly, means nothing. All it's telling you is a trend that the industry might be following. And as you and I know from one of the very first conferences you and I stood on the stage for post-Lehman Brothers, that the industry and its record keeping has a bit of a lag in it, because if you looked at the data from 2010 and 11, it told you that the financial services industry was actually increasing its space availability to employees. all that meant was it had fired all the employees a year before and hadn't managed to offload the lease. So the data was wholly inaccurate. So I think we've got to get better as an industry in knowing the impact of density on employee experience and then start hypothesizing about the future from that point. Nigel, you're muted.
Thank you. I liked Arjun's turn about, was it revelation? So again, it links back to that. And that fighting the density, the cost and so on, it's something we're going to struggle with. But I think it might link to the next solution. We've talked about the blended environment. We've talked about the occasional home working. And of course, in order to reduce densities, we might actually do the agile working with the home working, remote working a lot more. But again, our government doesn't seem to be in favour of hot desking. So, where does that leave? I know you're not from. So I know you're not living in the UK at the moment, Arjun. But I just wonder if you can help us unravel. Yeah. Is hot desking going to die?
I'm keeping up as much with what's happening in the UK as the US, because everyone I know is in. I mean, all my family, all my friends, and of course, Hardeed, everyone I work with is in the UK. And but it is interesting to have these two perspectives of America and England. But that specific point about hot desking, I think that hot desking is like Marmite. People either love it or they hate it, and the people who love it are going to find ways to make it work. And there's already some really, kind of out there solutions of having, bits of paper, that people walk around with a big sheet of paper and they put it on the hot desk or something. But I think that for people who have resisted hot desking, this is going to be another reason to resist it. But I do think there's going to be something in between that's going to happen and might be necessary for a lot of organizations. And that's going to be simple desk sharing. So rather than a hot desk where you wander around and find any available desk, you would have an allocated desk on the 3 days of a week that you go into the office. And if there's someone who is working 2 days a week from the office, they might have that particular desk those 2 days. And you would maybe know that person, although you obviously wouldn't see them in the office. And there would be an accountability to that desk is shared by those two people. And of course, you would have that desk for the whole day. It wouldn't become someone else's desk halfway through the day. It could be cleaned rigorously. And I think that would go some way towards helping people to have people work from home, and still not to, if they still have their own desk when they come back into the office, then again we've got this density issue. People just won't fit. So this is one of the solutions, and maybe going forward, that shared desk that's shared between two people can be 50% bigger. And then overall, you're still having a reduction in the space that's needed, but everyone gets a larger desk for when they are in the office. So that's just one kind of solution, maybe.
Yeah, because one of the questions we've had from the audience, from Nick Pell at Orchid Swanky, he was saying about, well, with the social distances, won't we need more space? And then what happens to the property market? But I think what we're saying is if it's blended with the low density but more sharing, then that kind of gets around that problem.
It does, but I think there's going to be a kind of musical chairs going on in the real estate industry, because the blend's going to be different for different organizations. So organizations where most people want to work from home most of the time, even if they give people more space when they're in the office, they're going to need less space overall. But there'll be other organizations where only a few people are able to or can work from home, and they, of course, are going to in future need more space. And I think what's really important here, though, is that, and I think this is going back to Tim's comment about looking at the obstacle and not looking at the free space. At the end of the day, what's most important is, what is the office there for? It's there to help the organization be successful. And we need to put in mechanisms that with the office that help the organization be successful and not put the cart before the horse. So we don't want to be saving money on an office building or not spending a bit more money on an office building if the impact on performance is much greater than the cost or the saving. Because we know that salaries are a much higher cost than real estate. So the overall impact on people's productivity is the most important thing. And, that's the difference between success and failure in organizations. If organizations change the way they're working going forward in a way that is not beneficial for them, that could be the difference between success and failure. That could be the difference between coming out with a great new product next year or never coming out with it.
Yeah. So maybe something we have learned here then, maybe it'll just remind us of that, that stop chasing reducing cost, property costs, stop chasing high densities to do it, and actually start to look at why, as you say, the workspace is an enabling piece of equipment, piece of technology. It enables us to do whatever we need to do. So look at it that way. Tim, I want to bring you in because a couple of things. I know you're going to have, again, you're going to help us with some of your data on unraveling the agile working environments versus the non-agile and what's working and what isn't. But also Catherine Grills from the University of Manchester, she said, do we have any good examples of organisations that have adopted that style of working and it actually works? I guess she means pre-COVID, but obviously if you're doing it pre-COVID, it's easy to build on it post-COVID.
Yeah, I think the best place that, Nigel, is you go to our website, download the last 2 years' worth of Leaseman Plus qualified buildings. These are all buildings that have outstanding employee experience results using our rating system. Roughly on an annual basis, it's about 4.5% of buildings that qualify for that. So it really is an elite category. Plough through the books, and what you'll find pretty consistently year on year is that you've got some that are open plan, some that are more cellular. You've got some that are assigned, some that are unassigned, some that are high occupant densities, some that are low occupant densities. So, it's not about necessarily any one of those factors. I don't think that any of us could pin in and say, is the fault of a bad workplace or is the secret sauce for a great workplace? It's just awesome design is what it is. It's great thinking. It's deep analysis. It's an in-depth and patient understanding of what the organization does. And to Arjun's point, what the people do within it. The value is in the employee, not in the real estate asset. It is if you're in the building, but not if you're the occupier of the building. So your asset value is in what your employees can do for you. And if that's around high energy, high collaboration, well, then you design a workplace that's fit for purpose for that. If it's high concentration for high intellectual capital work, then that's a different proposition, and you design a fit for purpose solution for that. So those two Leaseman Plus books for the last 2 years, and there's a lighter edition for the year before, give you all of the data that shows you which factors are most influential in delivering that high performance. But it's nothing to do with open plan, cellular density.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of so as a source of case studies, you can go to your website. I'm sure Zaha Hadid have got lots of lovely case studies on their website. I occasionally ping them on my website. Kerstin, I know you've got case studies too. So there's lots of information out there showing organisations that work. I do a lot of POEs, and what amazes me is, there's a lot of really good, successful buildings out there. I mean, I appreciate that in your index, Tim, because it's much broader. We see a lot of buildings that are failing, but there's also a lot of buildings that are doing it well. I forgot my thread of my conversation. It's to do with you, Tim.
So I'll pick up on one point you made there.
Yeah, go on. Well, I'm thinking it through.
Which is about, you said about the government, right? Well, actually, the government's got a bit of an issue, because the strategy it's been deploying is of very high occupant density and aggressive desk sharing ratios. So as one organisation that's going to have to go some to show us how to deliver a distance-sensitive workplace, I think we should look to them to show us. They've got a tough game.
That's a really good point, because I think a lot of the solutions we're proposing, it's presuming you don't have them in place now. So you're right, if someone's already gone down that journey of both high densification and high sharing ratios, they're the ones who are going to struggle. What I was about to say to you was one of your indicators is social space. So again, maybe just flip back to Kerstin just to mix it up a little bit. But this point about, I think you said it, Kerstin, we're social animals. We need the face-to-face. So how do we balance this new workplace of social distancing but social connection, working from home but coming in the office to collaborate? Any help with that one?
It's obviously a very tricky one, and I would say it depends on the opportunities that the layout offers. But you could, for example, think about outdoor spaces. So any organization that has some outdoor terraces or anything like that. We're coming into the summer months, at least in the global north. And that will give us an opportunity to possibly have things like stand-up meetings where you can keep the distance. And, you could just stand in a circle or in a small group and have conversations. The same obviously goes in an open plan office, that, you can have conversations with people across desks. So I think we need some thought around where those places and spaces are. Government guidance at the moment recommends not opening canteen spaces, for example. So that would be an opportunity to clear the furniture to the side and just have, little stand-up circles, little spaces for people to go and chat. I think the main challenge, I would say, is how do you bring in those who are at home? Because if people are working from home and some people will be in the office, how do you balance that? And how do you make sure that those who work from home don't feel left out and don't feel, they don't overhear, they're not really part of the organization and the culture as much. So I think that's one challenge. The other one is one thing that physical space is so good in is in providing opportunities for chance encounters, the things we didn't plan, bumping into someone, solving a very tricky problem. And I don't quite know who would be the right colleague to help me with that. Just bumping into someone in the coffee point and being able to, quickly pick their brains on something. That opportunity that physical space delivers is much harder to replicate or through any kinds of, scheduled meetings, because my problem might not be big enough to or I might not know who to ask. And it might not be important enough to now schedule a meeting with a colleague. So it's those kinds of opportunities of physical space.
Yeah.
More people at home, the less people we will have available in the office for those kinds of, unplanned encounters. So I think we'll have to rethink in times of distancing, what is what is a good mix? What's a good rhythm of, how do we disentangle? Is it every other day that people might come in and groups of people where you balance through smaller neighborhoods or through smaller teams? I've seen an interesting piece of data from a PhD student in Stanford who wrote on Twitter that he's done a survey with some of his pre-COVID participants in the university department and has seen that across-departmental interactions are suffering. And interestingly, those are the ones where we get good ideas from. People are not in our close circle, which called by Granovetter the strength of weak encounters. So it's how do we do those?
Yeah, so I'm conscious of time, Kerstin, but yeah, I think we in our industry, workplace industry, we do tend to focus on the physical and using the space as an enabler. But of course, all this comes from management, culture, social interaction, and so the starting point, as ever, is that do we know what we're trying to achieve? Have we got the right training to do it? Are we cognizant that there's going to be some people sitting at home struggling? How do we bring them together? How do we bring them into the conversation and create this truly blended virtual physical environment where if someone's on a laptop, it's like they're sitting in the room. It's not like they're sitting 30 miles away. We have run out of time, but half a minute, no, not even that, 20 seconds each. Stephen Heath from Coventry University has asked, how long do you think it's going to be before things return to normal, whatever that is? Anyone willing to have a go at that?
I can try. I mean, my crystal ball is broken like everyone else's. I would calculate with summer next year for a vaccine. That's what a lot of epidemiologists.
You're holding on for the vaccine summer next year.
I'm going for the vaccine. I think the thing to do is to be agile in your mind. To kind of, the times are moving so fast, and if we have the same conversation 2 weeks down the line, we'll have different points to make. I think each organization will have to, be on their toes and kind of think and rethink and think and rethink. So the experiment we're in at the moment, if we can nurture that and use that for that kind of rapid prototyping cycle to react, I think that's the best advice you can give people.
Thank you, Kerstin. Arjun, very quickly, prediction.
I think it's not going to be the same normal as before. And I like the term new normal, but I think it's going to be a different normal. And I think it's going to be an evolution. And I'm hoping for workplace, we're going to learn from this experience, and we're going to create better physical and home working workplaces.
Thanks, Arjun. It means you get the final word, Tim.
I think all I do is echo Kerstin's point. We've got to listen to the epidemiologists. We've got to listen to our leaders, put a little bit of trust in them. I think the Chancellor dipping into his pocket for the UK furlough scheme to last until October, I think is a pretty damn good indication that the UK, at least, leadership don't think that cities will return to any sort of normal behavioural patterns being observed before well into the autumn or winter this year. I think if you look at some of the restrictions that Spain and other European countries still have in place, although they're relaxing the social distancing around quarantine, I don't think people like you and me are going to be jumping on planes and going to international conferences anytime soon either. So I think we just got to accept, it's the holiday you're worried about. I think we just got to accept that it's a waiting game, right? None of us can guess. We're experts in workplace. Let's leave all the other complicated stuff to the experts in that stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Look, we've run out. I think this could have been in retrospect, this could have been a 2-hour session easy, because we've had 17 questions that we haven't even looked at. We've got a load of questions here. We might have to think about how to handle those, Maggie. In the meantime, we've still got 230 odd people on the call. So thank you to all of those who've joined us today. Thank you very much to my panel of industry experts. Lovely to hear from all of you. And I think we'll probably have to do this again. So until then, everyone, do what you need to do. Stay at home, do your social distancing, stay safe. And
physical distancing.
Physical distancing, okay. Whatever it's called, social isolation even, whatever. But just take care of yourselves. Think about whether you need to travel into cities or not. I'm not convinced we are ready for that myself, even though I've seen people doing it, and make use of the technology. And to stop you getting completely bored and completely losing your mind, we'll arrange some more of these type of meetings. Until then, have a good time. Thank you all. Bye.